our very distinguished guest, former UK Prime Minister Lord David Cameron, also was a surprise Foreign Secretary under Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and has lots more ahead. So Lord Cameron here to talk to us with his perspective on the India century. Thank you so much for being at the NDTV World Summit.
Great to be with you.
When we're talking about the India century, I think the point of the democratic legitimacy any Prime Minister gets with a mandate like we currently have in India. When we look at India today on the global stage, what is the perception from the West? Do you see it as a global moment of reset?
Well, I think the world at the moment needs, in my view, three things. It needs strong economic growth, it needs more democracy, and it needs this green transition to deal with climate change. And India is a shining example of all three of those things. And I think we do need a reset. The world has changed hugely since the institutions were set up after the Second World War. And so it's time for a reset, both because you see the rise of India. Now, will this century become probably the world's largest economy at some stage during this century? So obviously we need a reset, and countries like India should be at its heart.
What do you see as the key elements of this reset, with India taking a much more prominent role?
Well, first of all, we do need reform of the United Nations Security Council. It should have, and I made this argument, I think, as far back as 2005. When I became leader of the Conservative Party, India was the first country I visited outside Europe. When I became Prime Minister in 2010, India was the first country I visited outside Europe. I like to think that I was an early believer in the Indian century, and it's great to be back here today. And obviously, a permanent seat on the UN Security Council is something that should be India's right in this changed world. But I think we should be clear that although we need these institutions to be changed and we need them to reflect global realities, that debate will inevitably take a long time, and we shouldn't wait for that. And that's why it's so good to see India take its place in more informal global institutions like the Quad. I think that's a great move for India. India's role in the G20, the fact now that the G7 regularly invites India to attend almost as a standing member of the G7, as a fellow democracy, these are all good moves because we need India's perspective on these challenges we face in our world.
Prime Minister Modi actually going to be in Russia now for the BRICS summit. He visited Ukraine as well. Do you see that India, actually more than any other country, has the credibility, the trust on both sides to actually play a mediator in finding a solution?
Well, it certainly has the credibility, and if there's a role that can be played to bring this conflict to an end, that would be welcome. But it must be done in a way that recognizes Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. Putin cannot be allowed to take territory by force and be rewarded by that, because we know from our history, if you reward people taking territory by force, they come back and take some more.
Just to take that point and shift really, that where do you think, and Prime Minister Modi also made this point, that he came to the UK in 2015 and you were with him at that Wembley Rockstar reception. Tell us about that and your interactions with Prime Minister Modi. And for you, it was a bit of a dream come true as well at Wembley.
It's something you don't forget, because in the UK, if you're lucky as a Prime Minister or a party leader, you might, at your party conference, you might speak to 3,000 people or maybe 4,000 people. But to go to Wembley Stadium, introducing Prime Minister Modi, where you're speaking to 85,000 people, that was quite an occasion. But the thing I remember best about the occasion now is something I found out afterwards. So I made an introduction. My speech was very short, and in my introduction I said that my party, the Conservative Party, we'd had the first woman Prime Minister, we'd had the first Jewish Prime Minister, and I was sure that one day we'd have the first British Indian Prime Minister. And when I said that, I didn't know that there was a young man in the back row, many, many seats back, called Rishi Sunak, and he was there that day. Wow. And then became, as I didn't predict it would be him, but I predicted it would be someone, and he was at that speech with Prime Minister Modi, and then became, historically, Britain's Prime Minister, and it was an honour to serve under him. Prime Minister Modi made a very powerful speech. I remember he was talking about the relationship between Britain and India and the importance of our collaboration, and he had this great riff on tea, movies and finance, and it was Brooke Bond, James Bond, Rupee Bond. And I remember that. I thought it was a very snappy soundbite, but it was a great occasion. It was great to welcome him. And I think it really did sort of cement what I've been trying to do since 2005, which is to say that India and the UK should have a special partnership.
Tell us a little bit about Rishi Sunak, because of course in India it was a moment of great interest and pride when somebody who's of Indian origin became Prime Minister, but you made a surprise return as Foreign Secretary. Why did you do that, and what was it like working with Rishi?
Well, I admired him. I thought he was a very good Prime Minister. He's extremely hardworking, highly intelligent, very capable, a brilliant chairman, very good at bringing people together, and he asked me to be Foreign Secretary, and I almost surprised myself by saying yes immediately. But it was a time which we still have with the situation in Ukraine, the situation in the Middle East. It seemed to me someone who'd been Prime Minister could play a role in that, and it was an honor to be asked. I think generous of him to ask me, and reflected that he was keen to have experienced people around him, and he was highly capable.